going to a bike show and then being introduced to speed, and then back to the clubhouse for an after party. Yeah, it was pretty wild for a 20, 21 year old. Something caught the corner of my eye as one of the guys in the car was starting to lean out the window, and then the next thing I heard the shot, and then blacked out. I remember saying to him, just yeah, tell my partner and my daughter that I love them.
Hey Duncan, thanks for coming on I Catch Killers.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, mate. It's good to be here.
Well, it's funny the directions life take, isn't it? When I was speaking to you last week, I didn't realise we grew up in the virtually the same area, or adjoining suburbs, and you went one way, I went the other. I became a cop, you became a bikie, and here we are both sitting down talking about all sorts of things on a podcast.
Yeah. 6 degrees of separation, mate. Like, as I'm sure you've figured out through your journey, that it happens quite a bit.
Yeah, it's funny how life turns out. I got to say, with you being a patched up member of an outlaw motorcycle gang, I've met a lot of people through work, and I've met people outside of work that have gone down that path. And
Mm.
there was a frequently said saying that you join a gang, you're either going to end up dead or you're going to end up in jail. Now, you took the former and virtually did end up dead when you were shot, and that's a pretty heavy lesson to learn, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It wasn't by choice that I took that route. Yeah, wrong place at the wrong time, or just it is what it is, or was what it was back then, just in the middle of a gang war.
Did you, and we'll talk in more depth about joining an OMCG, but did you have when you were in it, did you comprehend that these were the potential consequences, that you could either do a lengthy stint or end up at the end of the wrong end of a gun?
Yeah, initially, no, when I was hanging around. And in saying that, I did see some violence when I was hanging around. But I chose, I guess, through ego and stubbornness, that that's the direction I was headed in, and that's where I wanted to go. Um, the longer I stayed around, and after I got patched up, the realization of how treacherous that life really is became more and more evident. And yeah, there was quite a few situations that I guess threw up some red flags that I chose to ignore, which ended up in culminating me being shot in a gang war.
Yeah, it's funny how you can go through life with at certain stages of your life with blinkers on. Your life now is definitely a completely different direction than what you're doing now, and you found the passion in youth justice and just trying to help people cope with the realities of life.
Yeah. Well, after that wake up call of being shot, and then years later, due to not dealing with my mental health issues, and the partner of my the partner that I had of my girl's mother wasn't dealing with hers. I turned to ice, and yeah, due to an ice addiction, had another, I guess, whether you want to call it an awakening or a brick wall. Yeah, then lost basically everything that I had back in 2014, and then realised that I was here for something bigger, or something different to the path that I was on.
Yeah, well, you dabbled in two areas that are virtually a one way street. OMCG member and an ice addict. So full kudos to you, the fact that you've turned it round. But I just want the listeners here to get a sense of who you were. So let's just wind the clock back a little bit, and let's talk about your childhood, growing
Yeah,
up.
yeah. I mean, sort of looking at it overall from what some youth go through, the life that they have as a child. My life was, reasonably good. I grew up in a working class family. I was the only child in the family due to, my parents having multiple issues conceiving kids. You know, my older sister was stillborn. My younger sister died of cot death. So after that, you know, and the trauma that my parents went through, they became pretty disconnected emotionally. So yeah, I grew up in an emotionally disconnected household. So I spent, you know, most of my younger years feeling very, I don't know, alone or on my own. Um, yeah, so that's sort of where it sort of kicked off. So it went very much inward, very much in my head from a very young age. Yeah, got sent to a private school in Sydney, thinking that I don't know, I guess the pressures of being the only child that I would be, you know, some sort of lawyer or doctor or whatever they had in mind. But then just, I guess, my journey and who I was and where I was at that time played out even more to make me feel like I didn't fit in back
Yeah.
then. And that was a story that I had running in my head.
You brought up a lot of interesting points there. And the first thing that you mentioned was that, yeah, your childhood relative to other kids' childhoods was pretty tame. But it is relative, isn't it? And we've seen in the work that you've done and the life that you've lived, the same with mine, some kids that have just had horrendous upbringings. But then the impact that had on you as an only child, where you've had a cot death and a stillborn in the family, and the impact that would have had on your parents, it can't be sort of understated. And just on as a homicide detective or an ex-homicide detective, I was called to a lot of cop deaths, and the pain and the trauma you can see, and it's something that's going to be very hard to get over. So as a kid, I can imagine you and you identified it, sort of distant emotionally from your parents. There wasn't a lot of emotional discussions about emotions in the family.
No, no, and you know, from the work that I've done over the last 4 years, men's work, and you know, some of the psych sessions that I've done, I've come to, I guess, terms or peace with understanding that, you know, my parents are just uh, they're just a version of the conditioning that they got brought up in, you know, from their parents, you know, so they were just doing the best they could and surviving the best they could from what they had just been through. I'm not sure whether I found my younger sister or I was close to mum when she found her in the cot. I blacked out like the first 7 years of my life due to that trauma. And whether the, you know, various stories I took on as, you know, that little boy at 4 years old or whatever I was, yeah, stuck with me. Um, so yeah, when I hit, was it about 15? Like I was already heavily involved in sport, and I had a lot of anger issues, which I took out on the football field and in sporting, which was luckily for me, I guess, a relatively healthy outlet.
Yeah.
But then after, you know, going through my first real relationship with a woman or a young girl, teenager, that ended, and I took a dive into basically a 6 month depressive state where I went into, you know, suicidal ideology, you know, planning it all out, how I was going to do it, where I was going to do it, all that sort of stuff. So I was very much in my head for that 6 months in a really dark space. And that's also when I started my drug addictions. I came across pot through one of the other guys that I went to high school with. And yeah, that was I used that as my escape.
Yeah, that's yeah, a teenager and a broken romance, and that we've all experienced that. But I suppose with the added to the emotion of the upbringing and all that, and you said that you had suicidal ideology, and even considering it at that age, it's a pretty heavy thing to be going through at that age. Is it because you didn't have the ability to communicate? Do you think that played a part?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, my father didn't have the ability to communicate with me. I remember him having a conversation with me when I came out the other side of it. He said to me, I could see what was going on for you. You're in a really, dark space by the look of it. But he just didn't have the tools to, or the ability to communicate with me or even reach me at that stage. So then it's created a negative outlook towards my father at that time, and even in saying that, obviously my mum didn't have the ability to connect with me either back then.
Yeah. But you can look back, and you touched on it, the product of their own environment anyway. And the 1960s, 70 father wasn't the type to show a lot of emotion to a son, and it was about make you tough, son, don't show emotions, and get on with it. So I suppose that's part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what I feel that we're seeing now is playing out in the youth these days, and even with guys going into gangs. It's generations on generations of generational trauma handed down from one to the next. My grandfather was involved in World War II.
Yeah.
Flying Spitfire planes across the English Channel looking for submarines. So what they suffered or what they went through back then, and then the Great Depression after that, created what it created in them. And that was just a flow-on effect.
And it gets passed on. You also touched in your teenage years, and I think it's all, we'll just expand on it, bring it all out. That you started smoking cannabis, marijuana, whatever. I went through that in my childhood. I don't think it's statute bar. We can't get into trouble for this, can we? We'll have to beep this out. Did all that. And I had some friends that it didn't affect, and other friends that it sort of really got addicted and changed their personality when they started to smoke. Did you see that in the environment you were hanging out in?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially going to a private school, I saw some of the guys that I went to school really head off in a very much darker space, like into smoking opium and stuff like that, or smoking heroin.
Yeah.
From what I heard and what I knew even back then, that I definitely didn't want to go down that path. But it still affected my mental health on a negative aspect.
Yeah, I suppose that's a danger, because you just don't know how people are going to react, and you hear like people that try the magic mushroom or whatever, and they're pretty well stuffed from that one experience. So it's
well, I believe like if they already have pre-existing mental health issues, then sometimes it can have a not so negative effect, and then there's the other end of the spectrum where it can really create a massive issue within the individual, and everybody's different, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's also for me, and from my understanding, is I guess the inability at that time to I guess accept help, or even have an understanding about the full range of the consequences of not dealing with mental health issues, especially as teenagers.
Yeah, you touched on one other thing, and we'll move on from your childhood shortly. But private schools, I've observed private schools. I didn't go to a private school, but private schools, the kids that I've come across in my policing, that had a chip on their shoulder. It can work for some kids, and I've seen some kids that have got really good friends out of the private school environment and a great education, but the ones that rebel against it, and you touched on it, you felt like it was almost an obligation to do well, because the big effort was getting your education and the pressure that's applied. What's your thoughts on that with private school education? Does it help everyone, or it should be?
Oh, I mean, realistically, it doesn't matter whether you go to a private school or a public school, and that's where I wanted to go, just a public school. I knew what my educational capabilities were, even at that age. But the issue partly there is, once again, it's a complex issue, but there's a level of expectation put on put on young people that they're going to go through and become, the doctor or the lawyer or whatever it is, whether they want that or not, which then has, the effect of the pushback or the rebellion from that young person. The other part to it is, there's a lot more money around. So the young kids in those, environments have access to more money. So when they go down that rebellious path, there's more access to money to do whatever it is that they want. As I said in saying that, like it's an individual thing, and you can see that in the education system, the way it is today, and, the amount of young people that are disengaged from it. I mean, overall, realistically, from, the education system hasn't really changed in generations or decades, and it's not catered for everybody. There's so many individuals out there that just aren't capable or have the ability to sit in a classroom, for 8 hours a day to do, different things. There's, other ways to educate young people.
I'm obviously no expert on education, but I know from a policing point of view, I always thought if we put money into education, it was better than putting money into policing. Policing was sort of dealing with it at the end of the cycle. If you could help out with education, we had Tim Watson Munro, a criminal psychologist, on. He was talking about schooling and what benefits there would be if you trained in school. And I think this would touch on some of the work you're doing with the young fellas. Teaching conflict resolution, emotional intelligence, all the things that you need in a life to get by and live a good life and manage the ups and downs that you find in life, instead of the 3 R's that we get taught. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. And, from the amount of men's work that I've done, how to communicate in a relationship, what's consent, what are your boundaries, what are your needs, desires, and wants within a relationship. There's some big ones, even the consent, even having an understanding about what consent really is, especially for teenage years. There's just so much more to educating young people rather than just maths and English and science.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's move past the education. You're interested in bikies. Were you into bikes as a young fella, or what got your attention?
Yeah, I was interested in bikes. My father wasn't interested in any of that, so I'd never really got into it. But I remember growing up as a young fella, we drive up to Byron Bay for a holiday during the school holidays, and back then, and interestingly enough, that I didn't live too far from the Comancheros clubhouse at Pennant Hills there growing up. I remember one time, heading up the coast for a holiday, and my father, or most parents had, hit those overtaking lanes, and it was like a dash to the finish of the overtaking lane, mad rush. Yeah. But there was one time that, I could hear, what seemed to be thunder. And just one time, my old man didn't jump out into the right lane. He stayed in the left lane, and then a pack went past. And it was like, I already had it in me then. It was like, yeah, shit, I want that. Yeah. But that was a memory that I'd forgotten about when I first came in contact with them after leaving high school.
It leaves an impression. I have images of that exactly the way you described it, with a pack of 50 bikies riding in formation up the highway, and no one's going to sort of create a problem. And the Comancheros clubhouse with Jock Ross in around Pennant Hills, I remember that well. I know that one well in the area. So you always saw them getting round, riding in their colours as they did in those days, and they did leave an impression. So you've seen that. You're seeing in the back of the car going on the family holiday, and you think, that looks a bit exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one time I remember, or a few times even, going up to get takeaway on Friday night with the old man, walk into the fish and chip shop, and waiting for our order, and there was a few members standing there. I remember one member distinctly had like, obviously it's an old war wound, just a massive scar that came down the side of his face, across his eye like that, and down his cheek. So there was that I don't know, curiosity, I guess, even from a young age there, as to what that life was about.
Okay, so you're curious, and you thought, okay, wouldn't mind a piece of that. But it's not like you go put in an application and apply to join a gang. What was the process that you found your way to a gang?
Yeah, well, when I left high school, all I wanted to do was work, and shortly after that, found myself working in a hotel in Parramatta, and ended up working with a member's wife, who was working behind the bar in the bistro side. So when we finished work on a Friday night, we'd sit down and have a few staffies after work, because it was a 24-hour hotel at that stage, for half the week. So we'd sit down at the end of the night on Friday night and have a few drinks, and then her husband came through and was picking her up sometimes after the meetings, and that's how I came in contact with him. And then the next thing was having drinks with him after my shift when he came past, and then went out to a bike show, and that was when I was also introduced to speed for the first time. So going to a bike show and then being introduced to speed, and then back to the clubhouse for an after party. It was pretty wild for a 20, 21 year old.
And I would imagine, like, going back to the clubhouse for a party, they're fairly volatile locations. So you're going in there, did you feel safe or feel intimidated, or just the excitement and the tension?
Yeah, it was more about the excitement, and obviously, the rush of being on speed for the first time was, it was all the cocktail, so to speak. Yeah.
Okay, so how do you progress from there? You start to hang around, and you're just one of the people that hanging around the club like that through your association with that member. Then what's the next step, so people understand the processes?
Yeah, well, for me, I hung around for a while due to the fact that I didn't have a bike. Back then, you couldn't do or prospect or be a nominee without a bike. So yeah, it took me a couple of years to get things together. So yeah, I was just driving out there and hanging out at the clubhouse on the Friday nights, and if wherever they'd sort of go, I'd drive, and sometimes I'd be taking members who had bike problems or stuff like that. I'd be driving them around, and then after I got a bike, I was nommed. I became a nominee. And did my 12 months there, and then ended up patching up, got my patch after that.
Now you're happy. Well, when I say happy, it's okay if we nominate the club that you're with.
It doesn't really bother me, but
no, we'll leave it out. It's a well-known OMCG club. You become a nom for the club by the name. Someone has to nominate you for membership. Is that what being a nom is all about?
Yeah, that's generally the way it goes. And due to the fact, though, that I'd been hanging around for 2 years or whatever, majority of the members really knew who I was. So one member specifically didn't nominate me, so to speak, when I came through. But yeah,
so it was accepted because you'd been hanging around. Okay, you're a nom prospect, and that's a bit of a shit job in any club, isn't it? As a prospect, what was some of the things you had to do there?
Just man the bar, cook barbecues, follow members around, do whatever certain members asked me to do. Within reason. Sometimes I chose not to do those, and there was a test there. Majority of the time, for my 12 months anyway, it was all a test to see, what I would do and what I wouldn't do.
Did you get tested physically, like the fights and different things?
Uh, for me personally, no. I just got tested as to sort of what I would do and what I wouldn't do. I stood my ground on a couple of things, and yeah, they let that go, understanding that didn't matter how much they tried to stand over me or force me to do it, I wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
So I guess it just showed my my will.
And it's not just the will; it's the actual blind commitment to the club as well, isn't it? To a degree.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
We had a member of the mafia on the podcast, Michael Francis, and he said
Mm.
when he got made a member of the mafia, it was told to him that yeah, we are now your family. We come before your actual family. Is that the type of attitude they have in the outlaw motorcycle gangs as well?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, my initial want to patch up for the club was it was um, preached to me or told the story that this was family. This is a greater this was a family, a brotherhood, all of these types of things. It was only after I got my patch that I worked out that it wasn't exactly all that they preached in the first place. So for a lot of I guess disgruntled young men who are disconnected from their family, as I was at that time, it it looks inviting.
That played on the attraction. I see a lot of people that have joined up. They were looking for their tribe, weren't they? It was just a sense of belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. And from what I know now, due to the work that I've done, like subconsciously, it was my rite of passage that I was looking for. And that's
Yeah,
as young men, all young men will choose a mentor. It's a matter of whether you have healthy mentors around them that they can choose from, or if they don't have and they've got unhealthy mentors, well, as we can see where that leads to,
it's going to take your life down the wrong path. You said once you became a member and started wearing the colours, you saw that it wasn't actually the way it was represented. Can you give us examples of that in a general sense?
Yeah, yeah. Due to certain members having drug debts to other members, if another member was purchasing drugs off them, and someone was living a higher life than what they could actually sustain financially, the guy who was at the bottom of the rung would be set up, or his drug debt would double, and if he couldn't pay it, then he'd end up being set up and bashed and have his bike and car and whatever else taken to cover the other guy's drug debt so he could keep his lifestyle going. There was other situations where there'd be certain situations where things would be videoed and showed to another member's wife and stuff like that, or used as blackmail. But if you don't do what we want you to do, we'll show this video to your partner, or if you don't do this or do that, then yeah, it's just used as blackmail. So yeah, it's extremely treacherous.
It's not really the brotherhood that is advertised, is it?
No, absolutely not. And from what I knew or worked out back then, it was that really started to change with the my generation that came through. The value or the understanding of how much money could be made of drugs, started to really come in by that stage. And some of the older members, became corrupted with that. And just was more worried about the dollar signs and making the money than actually any brotherhood or family orientation.
Well, money can put a divide through things, but I've heard a lot of old school bikies talk about it's not the way it used to be, and it's changed the culture of the bike, the club. Before it was all about the club, and then it became about how to earn the dollar, and that often took them down the drug path, and then things just escalate and get out of hand. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the older ones get outnumbered or they become to the point where they're too old. So, they're not going to go toe to toe with someone, or, someone coming through the ranks is a lot more volatile, as we've seen in recent years. So
Uh,
yeah, it all comes down to how much you value your life, really.
David Attenborough could do a documentary on it. It's like watching a pack of lions, isn't it? The young lion taking over the top. But it was a brutal world, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, it's what's the word? Yeah, it very can be very brutal at times. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I've heard people describe it too. It's almost like pyramid, as you talked about there. Sometimes the people at the top are getting all the rewards, but it's the people at the bottom that are taking the risks, that are doing the time, and doing the heavy lifting for the ones at the top to make money. And that in a any group, that's always going to cause division.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a power play too, mate. You know, like, and when it comes into that lifestyle, it's okay if you want the power. How far are you willing to go to take it?
Yeah. So that's we're just talking internal divisions here. What about relationships with other gangs?
Well, that was what I was actually just about to say. Was yeah, if we weren't at war with other gangs, we were at war internally.
Human nature. You got to love it, haven't you? You got to
Yeah, yeah.
you
Well,
got to have an enemy. If you haven't got an enemy, you'll turn on each other.
I guess that's a dark side to human nature. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So the trouble with the gangs, and I spent time in gang squad, and as a homicide detective, I often saw the end results of gang warfare, where there was a falling out between gangs. When you were around, what was the sort of tension like between the gangs?
Yeah, yeah. I had a few different run-ins with a few different clubs. At where I was, things managed to get sorted out before it got to full blown violence in the streets until the one that I got shot in,
Yeah.
which was over drugs and money, basically.
So that was that someone's moving in on someone else's patch? Was that the stuff that went down there?
No, no, it was a guy that was nomming up with another club
Yep.
that was how do I put it? It was had some product that they wanted, and he ended up getting caught out sleeping around with one of the members' wives. So then when they found that out, he basically ran and then came hid behind some of the guys that in my club, and then yeah, went out and started more issues with the other guys that he got away from, and then it evolved into a full blown war.
It's, without breaking that down, it's interesting you describe it that way, because people would often ask me about gangland killings and what causes this. Is it a big takeover bid, or is it this or that? Invariably, it's something like that. Someone sleeping with the wrong person's partner, an insult in a public place that just escalates, and it's there's no there's no what's the word I'm looking for? Ability to de-escalate things in that pumped up macho world, is there? You said this.
There's a lot of
yeah.
There's a lot of egos there, man.
That's right, and that's what always I'm just trying to. Let's wind it back. Saying at schools, conflict de-escalation or whatever. Let's sit down and negotiate it. But it's quite often it just becomes, let's stick our chest out and arc up and away we go.
Yeah, well, one of the authors of the books that I've read over the last few years was Lover, Warrior, King, Magician. He actually talks about it in there, and basically says that there's a whole lot of people, a whole lot of young boys running around in men's bodies out there, and the negative outcomes of those situations can be what it can be, which is what we see,
Yeah, and that's not putting too hard a term on it or description of it, because it quite often is that way. I find some of the bikies that I've dealt with are carrying on like you'd carry on in a schoolyard. They're part of a little group, and I'm not judging them. Quite often it's because of their upbringing, and that's why they've gone that way. But when they step away from it or mature and start to have different perspective, that's when they look at it and go, "Why was I doing that?"
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and that's what I found. when I was the case manager for the QPS exit program a couple of years back, that the childhoods that some of these guys went through, like there was a good handful that had been sexually abused growing up.
Yeah.
One was at the hands of the church, another one was at the hands of a foster carer. And that was just the ones who opened up to me, let alone, the other, physical abuse or neglect growing up. Another one who grew up sort of, I guess, similar situation to me, but his father wasn't around, was completely manipulated by a member, and ended up doing a few years because he thought this guy was some sort of father figure, some healthy mentor, and this member was just out to build his own empire at the cost of whoever. He didn't give a shit.
Yeah, it's ruthless, isn't it? It's manipulative too. When
oh yeah, I mean it's grooming at its best.
Yeah.
We talk about pedophiles grooming young kids. Well, these guys are grooming young young men looking for some sort of connection, or like you said, tribe, some sort of belonging for whatever reason, and it's just another form of grooming.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about your shooting incident. It's one that's had a significant impact on your life for a number of reasons. What were the circumstances leading up to it? Just describe you at the time. You're a patched up member of your gang. There was a bit of conflict going on between a rival gang, as you explained, and there was a memorial ride. If you explain that, what the memorial ride means, and that you went on that, and what happened?
Yeah, well, a memorial ride is for a member who's passed away due to whatever reason previously, and every year, whatever date is determined, the club gets together and goes on a ride, probably usually to their gravesite, out of respect, and then back to the clubhouse for a party. The memorial run we were going on for was a past president of my chapter, who was, pretty highly respected throughout the club. And so we would do the memorial run at the same weekend or the same time every year. So, even due to the fact that the war was on, the heads basically sat down and had a meeting and said, no, fuck it, we're not going to back down. This is our weekend. We do this every year. So it's going to go ahead.
No, knowing that would be poking the bear, so to speak.
Yeah, whether it's considered or poking the bear or perceived to be, taking a backward step, whatever that may be. But it was, the word was put out that the memorial run was going ahead regardless. So we just had to ride together in more groups. We weren't going to be riding one out.
Yeah, so in riding in your formation with the whole wearing your colours and making a statement and going through an area so people know where you are. And
basically, but it was also, not riding one out to get to the meeting places prior to the memorial run. Like we'd meet up in certain spaces before, somebody's house or whatever, beforehand, before going onto the clubhouse and then going onto the memorial run. So getting to that, it was basically, you worked on getting, at least a minimum of 2 or 3 guys to ride together to get to the initial pre-meeting place before you went on the run,
As in you'd be vulnerable if you were one out?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened? You met up with someone or?
Yeah. My sergeant at the time, he rode down, met me and one of my life members that lived close to me at the time. And I'd been out the night before at another member's birthday. So, I was, I guess, high, still coming down off drugs. So, I had my, morning intake knowing what the day was going to be like. And yeah, I already woke up in the morning feeling sick in the guts, and a little voice in the back of the head was saying to me, even then, don't get on the bike, just tell them you're sick, you can't make it. But then my ego took over and just, fuck it, just do what you got to do and get on. So then when he arrived, we took off and then rode from I was living in Beverly Hills at the time, rode from there out to Blacktown, and was it a kilometre or just over a kilometre away, we turned down the street in Blacktown, heading towards that, and rode through a roundabout, came out the other side, and there was a couple of parked cars there on the side. And just as we went past, just before we turned into the street, we changed formation and went through the roundabout. And my sergeant with the life member on the back ended up in front as we rode past the parked cars, and something caught the corner of my eye as one of the guys in the car was starting to lean out the window, and then the next thing I heard the shot, and then blacked out.
Right. When you say you blacked out, you kept riding for a substantial distance after you were hit, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, obviously I blacked out due to my body going into shock from the bullet going in my back and coming out my chest. So I blacked out and ended up on the wrong side of the road, pretty much in the gutter, still on the bike as when I came to, and then went through the roundabout on the wrong side. So luckily it was at a time of the morning on a Saturday morning where there wasn't much traffic around. Otherwise, there's a good chance a car would have taken me out. And then, I realized what had happened, and knew that I had to get to my vice president's place, which was, as I said, around about a kilometre up the road. Otherwise, there was pretty well guaranteed that, I wouldn't have made it.
As in they would come after you again?
Yeah. Well, as I went through the roundabout and out the other side of that roundabout, I looked in my side view mirror and saw the car do a U-turn and one of the guys get out, wondering obviously whether I was going to drop or waiting to see what would happen. So luckily enough, I managed to still be on the bike, and changed down a few gears and put my hand on my chest to try and reduce the bleeding, and rode the bike, wound the bike out up the hill, and off to my vice president's house.
So Duncan, let's just break this down. You were shot in the back and an exit wound in the chest. I've seen a lot of shooting injuries, and most people that get shot through the back and an exit in the chest don't survive, and generally speaking, die on the spot. How the hell did the bullet pass through your back and blast out through your chest and didn't take out any of your vital organs?
Yeah, good question, mate.
And I'm sitting here talking to you, and I'm somewhat confused. Holy, you died back in 2005.
Well, good question, because realistically, the trajectory of the bullet from where it was shot should have theoretically blown my heart out of my chest. But when the bullet hit my back, it straightened up and ended up only going half a centimetre away from my heart instead of going straight through my heart. And then came out my chest, and due to the fact that I had a jacket on, I think it suppressed it a fair bit, and the bullet actually was sat just inside my shirt, burning me just below the exit wound.
Incredible! Like, it's incredible that you managed on your bike and you managed to continue on and ride. You had the presence of mind to put a hand on your chest and stem the bleeding a bit.
Well, I'd been a security guard in previous years, so I had to do like first aid courses. So
right.
I guess natural instinct kicked in, and knowing that to do what I needed to do to try and suppress the bleeding as much as possible as I kept riding to get to where I needed to get to.
And you got to that location, a kilometre or so down the street?
Yeah. I managed to turn down the street where my vice president's house was, and that's where, by that stage, I was seeing individual rays of sunlight, so I knew things weren't good.
Is that the sign you get at that stage? Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but
well, that was the sign that I got.
You start, yeah.
was the sign that I got to realise that yeah, things were pretty close. And then yeah, I managed to pull up out the front of the house, and by that stage, yeah, I was pretty much yeah really close to death. So I forgot to put my couldn't manage to put my foot out,
Yeah.
and then ended up laying in the gutter with the bike on top of my legs.
Did your crew that you were with, did they stick by you? Did they follow you down the road, or were they split from or weren't aware what had happened?
No, no, my sergeant actually pulled in behind me with the other member on the back,
Right.
as in protection.
Yeah.
If they, if there was any more shots fired.
Coming back at you.
Yeah, yeah. And then when we were pulling up, all I could hear was him on the horn, just yelling out to the guys that were already at the house, waiting for us to arrive. Yeah, yeah. So then obviously, I'm assuming someone got on the phone to the to 000, but by that stage I'd blacked out, and I next thing I was dragged out from underneath dragged out onto the nature strip, and yeah, I came back to with someone slapping me in the face, yelling at me to stay with him, and I actually said I remember saying to him, just yeah, tell my partner and my daughter that I love them, because my eldest daughter was 4 months old by that stage, and basically said, "See ya." That was it.
Jeez, it's powerful stuff. I've had police on the show that have been shot and thought they were dying, and the same type of thing. Tell my husband I love them, or tell my kids, whatever. That plays out. Look, I think, Duncan, I'm sorry to leave you in this state. I think now it might be time to take a break. Now we're leaving you dying in the gutter. But when we come back for part two, I want to talk about your life outside of the OMCG. That from that was just one of the catalysts that steered you towards another life. But most importantly, from your life lessons, what you've learned and what you're trying to implement with helping other people going down the wrong path. And I think people who have listened to this episode will get a real sense of, okay, you've lived the life, and let's see where you take it from here. So we'll just leave you in the gutter. Just hang on for a little bit until we get back to part two, and we'll see if we can revive you.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, cheers.